We had, as far as I'm concerned, a God event this week. The context is important, so before you respond, let's process the context. But there was a ruling from the IRS this week that said churches could endorse political candidates without punishment. Not really anxious to get into that business. But the heart of that is they're restoring a component of free speech which had been taken away from people of faith. And not all people of faith, but there had been a segment of the Christian church that had been muzzled. It really goes back to the 1960s, which for some of you is ancient history, but Lyndon Johnson was president. The Vietnam War was at its peak, and there was a tremendous national divide, perhaps greater than the one we have today, over that war. And Johnson slipped into some legislation making its way through Congress, a provision that would revoke churches' exempt status if they commented on a political candidate. So it became known as the Johnson Amendment. He didn't want churches criticizing Vietnam. And so for 60 plus years, the churches have lived with it. It's become a part of the culture. And it has, to a great extent, because of the churches, not the politicians, folks. We serve a king. But it's resulted in churches being inept and inert, inactive. Because in our current environment, if we say, well, biblically, marriage is between a man and a woman, somebody starts shouting at us, you're being political. No, I'm being biblical. Or if we talk about sexual morality and immorality from a biblical perspective and what's appropriate and inappropriate, somebody's offended and they say, well, you're being no, we're being biblical. Or if we say that the nuclear family, a mother and the father and their biological children was God's best intent. Now, we live in a broken world. We don't all get that, but that's God's intent, not the multiple. Those are not political issues. Those are biblical issues. But because our churches are so divided and our faith is so inconsistent, it's been far more convenient just to not talk about those things. So we talk about the culture of the first century and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection and the Sadducees did not. That's why they're sad, you see. I've been to those Bible studies too. And we hide completely from the issues that are shaping our lives, our families, our children, our schools. DEI is evil. Amen. Judging people by their appearance is evil. Amen. But the church has been confused. So it was a tremendous breakthrough this week when the IRS said churches, that they've taken down some of the prohibition against free speech. So we're allowed, it's not that we're anxious, as far as I'm concerned, it's not that we're anxious to jump into the political arena and start selecting candidates, but it does give us the freedom to talk about culture and current events without that persistent threat. And the skeptics, and I assure you in the weeks and the months to come, you're going to hear a lot of arguments around this whole spectrum on this, and many of them will be from church leaders saying, well, churches shouldn't be doing that. So I think there's a couple of things we should understand. You know, they'll say, well, if you're going to do that, your tax status. Folks, schools and universities have significant tax protections. And I assure you, they are very ideological in what they teach. They have a worldview that they advocate for very blatantly, very boldly, very persistently, and no one says that they shouldn't do that. In fact, the only thing they say they shouldn't do is if they're boldly and blatantly Christian. And it's been the silence of the church on this issue that has enabled all this to happen. Once again, God is intervening. You know, it took a president who many people think wasn't morally qualified. I don't necessarily agree, but who said marriage is between a man and a woman because the pastors didn't have the courage to say it from the pulpits. And now the IRS, that's been the bully of the church for my adult life, rules that we can talk about what's happening in the public square again. God is moving. I promise you. One of the things that's been revealed this year is there have been hundreds of billions of dollars, tax dollars, going to NGOs, many of whom were tax exempt, to do the bidding of people with very significant political agendas. So God is moving in the earth, and the IRS ruling this week was a tremendous victory for freedom of speech for all of us. What that will look like and how that gets lived out will be a thing of much debate. I can tell you that Representative Mark Harris of North Carolina and Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma have introduced a bill into Congress that would make that IRS ruling, it's called the Free Speech Fairness Act, a part of our law, and completely reverse the Johnson Amendment. That would be a victory, and it's worth praying for. Telling God's moving so fast, we don't have time to keep up with it all. Supreme Court, the IRS. Who thought God would use politicians, the Supreme Court, and the IRS to bring freedom to the church? Not me. You know, and I mean, I'm thinking, well, if you were going to do that, Lord, could we have done it 60 years ago? Shut up, Alan. I'm clearly not in charge of the clock, but the Lord is moving.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel. You know the drill. Hit the bell for notifications. If you want to, leave a comment.